Welcome to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How we consume it and how it informs our everyday culture.
I'm Christian Sager, a writer and a designer.
And I'm Charlie Bennett, a librarian and a radio raconteur.
Each episode is us trying to understand the entertainment world that we all live in.
Just a little bit better.
Today's episode is about Aeon Flux, the animated series. This MTV oddity was televised between 1991 and 1995 in a blur of non-linear, ambiguous chunks. We talk about how creator Peter Chung got this made while inserting symbolic references to the limits of 1990s storytelling. We also wonder why we're so nostalgic for a simpler time when our entertainment was more nebulous and weird.
You can find our sources at patreon.com/supercontext, where you can also leave a comment on the episode or write us an email, supercontextpodcast@gmail.com. Would you watch this now? Who were you when you watched Aeon Flux? So recently, my son has been dressed in a lot of hand-me-down clothes, but not hand-me-down inside the family, hand-me-down from friends.
Okay.
And those hand-me-downs are actually at the end now of a very long chain of boys, including a kid who I think is a teenager now. So when he was wearing these, 4 or 5-year-old clothes, it was much closer to the 90s, and they all just look so much like 90s fashions.
A lot of pleather and rings and piercings.
You gotta just imagine the kind of long-sleeved, slightly floppy shirt with the 90s cut jeans. Just that kind of regular dude-looking look, right? It makes me feel warm and fuzzy, like 9/11 never happened.
Man, Charlie, there's a lot to unpack for you in what you just said.
Well, I thought you would enjoy that. I thought that if I put it together in that sort of pill, that you would really enjoy.
That's the beginning of the therapy session. Why don't you tell me about your father?
No. I think I've done enough of that already.
See, here's the thing. You already are telling us about your father, Charlie.
Yeah. The thing is that I do like the 90s, obviously. That's a running joke and a truth in this show. Mm-hmm. But also, like, watching my son look good in clothes that I was like, oh, I wish I could have pulled that look off when I was, a young man. Like, that's what I wanted to look at.
You were 4?
No, he looks like a small version
of
who I wish I looked at
for the audience,
at 22.
By the way?
He's 5.
Okay.
I don't think you're very familiar with how child fashions work.
Oh, I beg to differ. I was an Oshkosh Bagosh model when I was your son's age. Let's not forget.
We're a little bit off track, so let me try and bring us back. The clothes my son is wearing these days are miniature versions of clothes that I either wore or wanted to wear when I was a teenager or a young man.
Okay.
And it's really made me consider nostalgia with a lot more thoughtfulness, I guess. Because I can feel the sort of, oh, wow, look at him. That's great feeling. And like I said, it makes me feel like we're back in time before things got all whatever they are now. And this fits with our subject today because Aeon Flux has haunted me since I saw it in the early 90s. And I didn't know that until we really started considering this media artifact. I also didn't know that there was a full episode series to go with those little shorts.
Oh,
that were
really?
on Liquid Television. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I had just this, like,
so you thought there was
sense.
never a voice to Aeon?
Yeah. It was just those dying every time, pops up occasionally, can't put it all together. What is this story kind of feeling? Which was totally cool back then. And I think would make me crazy right now.
Man, you're throwing a lot of stuff out up front before we even get into what this is. So I'm going to try to step back and slowly unpack some of this. So, all right, let's work our way backwards. Why would the idea of a non-linear narrative make you crazy now?
not a nonlinear narrative, but having to track down without being able to track down bits and pieces of a story I was trying to follow.
You've said this before, having to track down. You've said it about other things when they have like ancillary subject matter that like, you know, you can go look up on the internet or something like that, or webisodes. You feel beholden to consume an entire thing in order to be able to enjoy it. Right? Like that's what you're saying is that like, because you didn't know that there were these other 10 episodes, you didn't realize you hadn't participated in the whole of Aeon Flux.
Right. I also don't want to formulate an opinion about something until I've gotten what to me is the whole of the art.
Okay. So what you're saying is if Aeon Flux came out nowadays, you would feel like you would have to do a super context episode on it in order to have an opinion about it. Like you would have to go read up on it, understand what the creator's motivations were, how the production company put it together.
Very particularly, if I had to just turn on the TV and hope that some piece of the thing I was trying to watch would pop up, I would lose my mind.
Okay.
We are in an on-demand society, and I have become comfortable in it.
All right, let's keep working backwards then, because I think all of this is going to add up to the dystopian reality of Aeon Flux. What about the 90s, not just culturally and aesthetically, is so appealing to you? And I want to pitch what I think it is first. You were at a period of time in your life where you didn't have as many responsibilities.
Sure.
And the world seemed simpler because you weren't participating in day-to-day politics and economics. And so, like you say, pre-9/11, as if none of the problems of society were happening in the 90s, leading up to 9/11, leading up to the world that we live in now. But you are consciously aware that they were there. It's just you weren't engaging with them, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm not stupid. I was just trying to get along.
Yeah, so I can sort of relate to that too. Like when I was in high school and college, it was pretty easy to not engage with the O.J. Simpson trial or the impeachment hearings of Bill Clinton.
To be aware of and not engage. I think that's really the important part of it. You could know that something was going on without being inundated by it.
Yeah. And so Aeon Flux and boys' fashion of that time is sort of nostalgic, reassuring to you because it's like an aesthetic cultural trapping that reminds you of that simpler time when there were less worries.
Yeah, just like a smell can take you into a memory.
Okay.
There are certain signifiers.
As I've learned on this show.
Yeah, there you go. There's certain signifiers of a time that really pull up my memory. Clothes and music, and I think maybe even haircuts a little bit. I think because of the time, like when I was in college, what was I focusing on all the time? Right?
Fucking
the people that
drugs.
I was talking to. Yeah. And the people I was talking to while I was having sex and drugs. No, I think in college, it was such a maybe casual lifestyle or just a talking, coffee, cigarettes lifestyle that there was a lot of people right in front of my face, long conversations, lots of time to just kind of take in their fashion and the ambient noise around us.
Okay. And I think then it's also probably fair to say that you, like me, but probably more than me, are an MTV kid.
Yeah. Because it happened in the middle of high school for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it when I was putting this together. I was reading the notes on how MTV were particularly trying to target a young adult audience with this. And then I thought about the other material that wasn't music videos that they were producing in the 90s, and it all got its hooks in me, even though I'm like consciously aware that it was designed to do so that the commercials would be able to target me. Things like this or The State, for instance, really like loom large in my memory.
even the kind of self-aware game shows that happened.
Remote control.
We're paying attention to pop British game shows and trying to find that instead of, The Price is Right.
So what we're seeing here, like I think if we really back out wide, right, we're seeing a corporation say, we want to target this youth demographic, and we're going to turn to these counterculture artists to create material for us. It's Peter Chung, it's the troupe from the state, it's, Chris Hardwick.
And I have a theory about that. There was a lot less targeted data than there is now. Mm-hmm. They didn't have, the Facebook account of the person who is clicking on the particular video. They just had this idea.
They had a wider net.
Like, we got to catch these folks. What do they like? What do the young people like?
And so what we find is, because you and I roughly grew up around that time, we were in that target demographic. Here we are like 25 years later reflecting on this. And not only did they have us, but they still have us, in that like we associate positive feelings with this content. Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time right at the top of the episode trying to get a rise out of you.
Yeah.
You were very stoic, all the stuff I threw at you, which is why we eventually got into, the deep stuff so quickly. But the phrase, "it's haunted me,"
right?
I am sort of leaning into that to like get the reaction, but also it's true. Aeon Flux pops into my head regularly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In a like, oh hey, like this is something that's actually happening in the world right now, or just casually like symbols remind you of it.
Yeah, and a memory of an incompleteness.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, this in a way is weird fiction because of the ambiguity that's involved in it and the uncertainty. I wouldn't really call it like cosmic horror, but it's weird in the sense that like you never really get grounding, like there's no stable world to hold on to because it changes every episode.
I think there's a case to be made that it is a modernist impulse in a postmodern time.
Okay. So because I am going to guess that most of the audience has no idea what this is. So why don't we introduce them to Aeon Flux, and then we'll return at the end to that statement that this is a modernist impulse in a postmodern world.
And let us begin by saying, please put the film out of your mind for now, because a lot of people probably know about the movie.
We should say this is specifically about the animated series that was on MTV from 1991 to 1995. You're right, Charlie. They may be more familiar with the 2005 movie. We will briefly address that exists, but this episode is about the animated show.
So Aeon Flux is a 3-season television show that is not a 3-season television show at all.
Barely,
I think the first season is just one episode. I mean, it's weird how, say, Wikipedia or IMDb tries to classify these things,
So actually, I've got the DVD set here with me.
Okay, yeah. What do they say?
The first season is technically the pilot, which I believe was 12 minutes of footage that was broken up across 6 2-minute episodes.
And that's what really got me. That's when I feel like some weird William Gibson pattern recognition, find the footage, what's happening kind of narrative feeling. That's that.
And in addition, I believe the first season is also counted as, I think there were 6 shorts that were commissioned after that. So they were similar in that they were like 2 to 3 minute episodes, maybe a little longer.
The shorts are longer. Yeah, they're more like, they can be up to 6 or 7 minutes, some of them.
But they're the same in that there's no voice to the character, and she dies at the end of every episode.
Yeah. Or in the middle of some of them.
Right. And then the second and third seasons are a series of 10 full 30-minute episodes that are produced as their own separate thing. All of the other shorts occurred as a part of liquid television. We'll get into all of this, but and so there's 10 30-minute episodes that are available as well.
And if you go looking for this, just like, Google and see what happens, you'll find sometimes, as I was saying, people will classify the 10 episodes as a third season, the shorts as a second season.
The way they break it up on the DVDs.
Yeah, I think people are trying to make sense of how each of these changes happened.
Well, it might not be okay. That makes a little bit more sense because the way the DVDs are broken up is not by season, but by who directed them. So there's a disc that's all the Peter Chung episodes, and then there's a disc that's all the Howard Baker episodes. And I don't know when they chronologically appeared.
All right,
but it also doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we're doing that thing where we're dropping a lot of stuff without the context. So 91 to 95 is the sort of era of Aeon Flux, but there's very few episodes for something that you say is going for 4 years. We've done an episode on The Max, which seems connected to Aeon Flux because Liquid Television on MTV was a variety animated show that had a number of narratively connected but self-contained fragment kind of animations.
Yeah, so there's a description here from Emily Ooze, who writes about it in one of our research pieces that'll be on the landing page. And Emily says, the show takes place in a cyberpunk-styled dystopian setting. Its story follows the movements of a female assassin insurgent named Aeon Flux as she attempts to outwit and overthrow her nemesis and lover, Trevor Goodchild. She is a spy from an anarchist society called Monica that's represented in borderline fetish fashions and leather gear. Goodchild is the authoritarian dictator of the adjacent city-state of Bregna. He uses citizens as scientific test subjects and is under constant threat of Aeon's political plots and allure. At no point in the show is it made clear which one is the protagonist and which one is the villain. Now, this is the real, I think, highlight statement about the creator's intentions. Peter Chung's aim from the very beginning was to uphold ethical ambiguity in order to inspire questioning thoughts in the viewer, questions which would remain unanswered conundrums. Aeon Flux is not concerned with continuity either, as the titular character suffers a violent death in several individual episodes, only to emerge unscathed in the following ones. Okay, so that's like a real... You could describe any episode of this show with that paragraph.
You mean like Chung's aim, right? Because the whole bit about the two societies and the particulars and the name of Trevor Goodchild, that kind of flows into the world of Aeon Flux by the time the show itself begins. The 22-minute episode series begins.
It's never really articulated the Monica Bregna stuff. Yeah, but Trevor and Aeon are always there.
And that explanation of the central conflict certainly is accurate, but does not seem to encompass what we're actually dealing with when we watch the show.
Yeah, so to provide a little bit of context, the way the show aired first was on Liquid Television. Liquid Television would play in, I guess, 30-minute blocks on MTV.
That sounds right.
You would catch it whenever it was on, right? Like it probably aired, I would guess, 5 or 6 times a day. And in the middle of an episode of Liquid Television, you would get a 2 to 3 minute Aeon Flux bit. And you would try to watch it and go, wait a minute, what am I watching? What does this mean? And then it would be gone. And you wouldn't see another one until the next time you happened to tune in and Liquid Television was on, and you wouldn't know why she was alive again or how this made any sense. And what they knew at the time was that teenagers, Charlie and I, were watching MTV over and over and over again and watching the same material. And so Peter Chung designed Aeon Flux with that in mind, knowing that it was repeat offenders, right? And that you were going to consume this over and over again in a way that most television wasn't designed to be consumed.
And I think the producers of Liquid Television were also okay with this kind of material because they needed us, the viewers, to settle down in front of the TV and hope for the best when it came to what was going to be played.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about Liquid Television later. We talked about it in the Max episode. But yeah, it was just this hodgepodge of animated weirdness. Little short animated bits, the kind of things that you would see on YouTube now that would be like a meme for a day. Yeah. And then...
Some of it is utterly forgettable.
Yeah, yeah. Aeon Flux is one of the few things that came out of it that like had longevity.
Yeah. So Peter Chung created this. He is a Korean American animator. He is a working animator. He's worked on Rugrats, The Animatrix, Reign the Conqueror. I don't know that one, Chris. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't seen that one, but I've seen a lot of these other ones.
Okay. The Chronicles of Riddick, Dark Fury, Revisioned, Tomb Raider, and Fire Breather. He also worked with Ralph Bakshi when he was young, Peter Chung was young, on Fire and Ice.
Yeah, he had a lot of pretty formative experiences in the 80s as an animator. He also worked on the Transformers television show, I found out doing research here. Yeah.
Wow.
But it was really like Rugrats and then Aeon Flux where he was like in control of things.
Yeah. He is the son of a diplomat, so he's international. He was born in Korea. They moved around a lot, and he says that exposed him to a lot of different kinds of comic books and animation back at a time when you couldn't just pull it up on the internet. Here's a quote from him about a couple things that really stuck with him. I was a big fan of Astro Boy, and I especially liked Tiger Mask for its graphic quality and moral ambiguity. By day, he was this sweet orphan. Then he went into the ring and beat the crap out of people. There were a lot of European comics I liked as well.
And you can see that on his influence in Aeon Flux. It comes up again later, but Mobius is obviously an influence, and some of those Metal Hurlant folks are clearly, informing this. And I didn't realize that at the time because I was a kid. I didn't know what they were, but there's definitely like a linear trajectory through those things into what he produced with Aeon Flux. He saw it as his way of bringing all those things together. So the Asian comics, the European comics, and the animation background that he had all went into this TV show. There's a lot that's made about the idea of Gnosticism as a symbolic backdrop for this.
This
cartoon.
was something I did not pick up at all.
Yeah.
When I viewed it as a young man first time.
Me either.
Reading this description from Alison Veneto on Smart TV, it makes perfect sense. Like rewatching and then watching for the first time some of those episodes, it's like, oh yeah, he's totally pulling religious imagery and messing around with some of these concepts of spirituality and how reincarnation or life force works.
Yeah.
So this is from the Veneto. Aeon Flux has a serious Gnostic bent. The ancient mystery religion is where they got the concepts of aeons and the demiurge, amongst other things. Its influence helps give the show its spiritual feel, and possibly the inspiration for long Greek words as titles of episodes. Aeon and Trevor's relationship is the center of the show, and you don't need to know the spiritual meaning of aeons, life forces, to enjoy it. It's clear they're both attached and attracted to each other. There is a duality in the leader and the terrorist, a man and a woman, and they are the only ones who truly understand each other. This is the thing that really stuck out. Their relationship also surpasses death, she says. Death is not what matters. And in Aeon's case, it's usually caused by careless mistakes. But it doesn't matter when she shows up again in the next episode.
Yeah.
This is like myth. This is a rendering of stories like you read in Greek myths where just stuff happens, and if someone dies, they might come back, or if they're burnt to a crisp, they might be reincarnated, etc., etc.
But there's no narrative context, and this show does not hold your hand and explain things to you through exposition, especially the shorts. So you're just kind of left to your own devices to be like, what did I just see? What is happening here? And it was... I think it's fair to say it was unlike anything that was on TV at the time, especially animation.
But it had the vaguest connection to anime. Mm-hmm. It was almost coded as Japanese animation, especially because there was the fetish gear. And so it was like, ooh, sexy cartoons.
Yeah.
That must be from overseas.
We should establish this earlier than we have. This is a cartoon, if you've never seen it, that is known for the characters being half naked, running around in bondage gear. And there is a lot of talk that usually comes up in research articles about Aeon Flux about how it objectifies women through the way that the characters are drawn. We'll get to that a little bit later when we talk about representation, but just know that like the title character is often wearing like very skimpy leather fragments that are strapped around her body.
Impossible outfits. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's also a lot of rendering of erotic concepts in mechanical movements.
Yeah, for instance, like in one of the shorts, they pass a note from to each other through a French kiss, and the camera is inside their mouths, and you see one tongue loosen a tooth inside somebody else's mouth and take out a note from underneath the tooth. Stuff like that.
Yeah. So this was sort of coded as foreign, coded as international, because it was so different from what was on TV for Americans at the time.
Yeah.
But it also is not totally outside the style and concerns of Japanese animation, German expressionism, European comics, especially the French ones. It makes more sense now to look back at it and say, oh yeah, I see where those influences came. But at the time, it was an explosion in my head, and I think in a lot of people's heads,
mm-hmm.
that it was so not like animation up to that point for a lot of people.
It is, unsurprisingly, probably to you and our listeners, a huge influence on me and how I approach storytelling. And like, I will always have it in the back of my head. And when this DVD box set was made available in 2005, I guess it was around the same time that movie came out, I leapt
that was a big push for it.
Because I had all these old VHS tapes with, a couple of scattered episodes that I had taped off of MTV, and I was dragging them around with me in like a cardboard box from place to place as an adult.
This is the kind of nostalgia that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just nostalgia for what was good, but also just nostalgia thinking about how we used to consume, thinking about how we used to track down, thinking about like what it meant to go record hunting or book hunting before you could search.
Before everything was available at your fingertips, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Peter Chung's sort of constraints, because we just talked about the fetish gear. He has a clear statement of why he did that. We wanted it to stand out, the cartoon, so we added shock value, like the way they dressed. It wasn't the point, but it was a way of getting viewers hooked.
Okay. Yeah, and it worked, right? Because
totally.
The target audience was young boys, and most of us saw that. And I'm going to make an argument later on that I don't actually think the visuals of Aeon Flux are sexual. I think that they're rendered so skeletal and creepy that it's not, it doesn't, I don't know about you, but it like doesn't make me feel any kind of like, ooh, titillation from watching it.
Okay, yeah.
It's more like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. And then I was about to say, what are you talking about? Because they are sexual in the sense that like when you see two people hug and then it cuts to like a piston moving.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Right.
But I do understand, it's not erotic.
It's like watching
pornographic.
Storks have sex.
Right. So Chung says that when he was creating the character and then the series, that he had these conditions that he was putting on his creation. He said it was very much a process of elimination. I set myself a rigorous set of restrictions, things I disallow. The character is not an ideologue, a patriot, or a crime fighter. No one is giving her orders. No family, no assumptions. I tried to eliminate anything that would allow you to predict her actions. Aeon has no family or ties to anyone.
He elaborates on this later on. I highlighted that because he says he has an aversion to backstory in the stories that he writes. And he says backstory is a trap. And he means it's a trap for writers, that like you get stuck and you feel beholden to these fake facts that you apply to your characters.
Have I mentioned the David Mamet's kitten example before?
I don't think so.
So this is something that's in one of his books. He wrote a lot of small books that are really interesting to read about acting, about theater, about film. And in one of them,
just before he went crazy,
he did go crazy, or he simply radically changed his perceived political outlook.
Yeah,
whichever one works for you. But here's the thing he said: backstory, or history, or what exists in the character before the narrative that you're trying to create. I don't know that he called it a trap, but he did say, don't do that. And his example was, imagine a play in which a soldier is saying goodbye to his friend.
Okay.
He has to go to Berlin. And his friend knows he has to go and says, you must go, and you must go now.
Okay.
And in the play that David Mamet would like you to write, our character says, see you in Berlin, and exits. In the play that David Mamet would like you to avoid, our character says, go, we all must go. How many different ways are there? When I was a child, I had a kitten, ... And so this is his sort of, do not create something that you feel you then have to represent that is not about the story, that is not about getting everyone from this beat to this beat to this beat.
Right. So and that seems to be what Chung is advocating.
Yeah,
for
that
as well.
It makes a lot of sense to me in terms of David Mamet's kitten.
And Chung goes on to talk about his theories about narrative. He says, what makes a story compelling is, 1, it has coherence, and 2, it corresponds to personal experience. The more unlikely the conclusion, the more compelling the tale. We want to learn how an event that seems to make no sense actually does when you know the details. That's how headlines hook you, and what keeps you reading until the end of a newspaper article. Aeon, unlike the revolutionaries in so much science fiction, is not struggling to win her freedom. She isn't striving to be free because she is free. So he's sort of articulating here like this like larger mission statement that he had for this show, in the sense of like getting people's attention, knowing that they were going to be watching this thing over and over again at uncontrollable times.
Yeah.
And trying to make it stick in your head. And it seems to have worked, at least for the two of us.
Yeah, and we should go back to those two things he said, the coherence and personal experience. And what I get from that, like reading all of our notes, he's saying that Aeon Flux and what she does in the story is about her and her desires. And it's not about trying to bring down, the dystopia. It's not trying to change the world. It's not trying to save anyone. Although that does get a little bit lost near the end of the series, right? Mm-hmm. And then the coherence part, like everything we've said so far, makes it sound like it's incoherent.
Yeah.
And yet what really is happening, I think, and what he means is that it's coherent even if you don't understand it.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I think
things make sense.
The beauty of it, it's the opposite of comics. There's no continuity, so you pop in at any point and you can pretty much from context figure out what's going on and follow the storyline. You don't need to know what the history is of these characters because there really isn't any.
And if insane things happen, as long as it seems to make sense that they would happen in whatever you're presenting, it can be coherent in his terms.
Yeah. So he goes on and he says that Aeon was his reaction to seeing Hollywood action-adventure movies. And he wanted to do something that showed viewers what was always implicit, but what action-adventure films never actually delivered. And he says this was basically that the main character did all the standard heroic things, but in doing so, they had a moral vacuum in which you don't really know why the hero is doing the things they're doing, but you're caught up in the action of them doing those things. And he said seeing how viewers would and how far along you could lead them to the point where the character dies, the hero dies, in a ridiculous manner, that's been what he was trying to work out with the initial Aeon Flux stuff.
And so here's another moment that we should explain a characteristic of the series, especially that beginning set of shorts. Sometimes Aeon Flux is just running with 2 guns, killing everyone.
Yeah.
And it's just it's like 80s action movies times 1,000. There's one short that ends with like 2 feet of blood on the floor.
Yeah.
And corpses floating in it.
And the next one picks up, and it's all it is from the perspective of the people dying in 2 feet of blood. Yeah.
Which is wild. Makes me think of that bit in The Invisibles.
They're similar, I think.
Yeah. You follow the minor character who doesn't even have a name from
the soldier.
When he's born until the moment he's killed by a main character. So he is spoofing or exploring the way that we're totally cool with Arnold Schwarzenegger killing everyone in a room because he's the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, Chung actually kind of says that was an excuse. He says it was an attempt to get Aeon Flux to tie into the whole liquid TV concept, which was to basically do a show that was satire and spoofed various genres of things that were out there. The thing that I chose was heroic action adventure movies. I never took Aeon Flux as a satire of that stuff. I always thought that it's...
I didn't either.
Yeah. I always thought that it was following out of that tradition, that it was referencing that, and that maybe there was some extremes that it was trying to highlight. But it felt like a deeply personal, deeply weird rendition of something.
Yeah. Chung says that he always enjoyed the action adventure films that he was referencing because he thought that they were visceral. But he always thought that the main character was the hero only because the director chose to position them that way, not because they actually did anything heroic or had heroic characteristics. And he said he didn't like the idea that all of the victims were treated as being less than human, so he wanted to subvert those movies with this. And then subsequently, he kind of had arguments with MTV about this within the context of Aeon Flux. Quote, "They didn't understand it. The only way I was able to sell it to them was to tell them that it was a spoof. My intentions were much more. I guess you could say that they were academic. I was interested in experimenting with visual narrative, telling a story without dialogue, and also trying to create a style of telling a story with animation that wasn't influenced by the usual kinds of things that you see." So the satire spoof thing was sort of like a cover story.
Yeah, a way to sneak it past people who were trying to, what is this? I don't understand. Why would we put this on the air? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, it's a spoof. Like, oh, okay. That's why it's so weird.
And here he talks about the plan based on the format. One thing that was very important to me was doing something that could be watched more than once, and that you could look at it again and still read other things into it. Because the fact that MTV's been running that show over and over and over again is still going to do that. I can't imagine that a lot of people at that time, when they were offered like, hey, here's a 2-3 minute animation segment, that they were thinking about the format and the delivery system in terms of how to tell the story.
And, my idea of whoever created this, at the beginning when I was first watching it, I think I've already said this, but, I imagined a madman, right? Like an insane driven person who was sort of putting this together, in order to make sense of the voices in their head.
So one thing that I'll say that's kind of fascinating about Chung, because for this episode, I sat down and watched a couple of the episodes with the commentary tracks on.
Oh, okay.
And he is very precise about what his intentions are, but at the same time, he also is very withholding in that he doesn't want to interpret what the episodes mean for the viewers.
Yeah, that fits what I know of him so far.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments where the other writers or producers will ask him like, "What's this all about?" And he'll say, "I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to ruin it for the reader." And then a couple of years will go by and he'll pop into an interview like the one that we're reading from here, and he'll be like, "You know what? Enough time's passed. Here's what I think."
Everyone's made up their minds. Let's go ahead and fuck with that. But he's decision that they've made.
Yeah, but he's really conscious about the relationship between the creator and the audience.
Now, one of the things I was leading up to when I was saying like I thought that this was sort of a driven, crazy person, he had a work process that was very straightforward. We actually have it all broken down. in this interview, the writer says, how long does it take to make something like Aeon Flux? For Chung, it's broken down into a fairly modular process. He spent about a month writing and revising the script, another month to design the characters and backgrounds, and a month after that, storyboards, preliminary layouts, a blueprint of how the actual film would look, and then another month of laying out scenes, and then 2 months in Korea of actually producing the animation.
That's
so over 6 months, yeah, they made what is a whole broken into multiple liquid television shorts of about, 40 minutes?
No, 12 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, I think what he's talking about here is the pilot. I don't think he's talking about the shorter. Maybe he is. Maybe he is.
Doesn't that seem like it makes more sense that those 6-minute ones, those like the war one where we see Aeon die in the middle and then we keep following new characters?
Yeah, right.
That feels like the big chunk.
That could be it, yeah. But either way, it's not a lot of content.
Yeah,
when you think
this is
about
not
how much time. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not the 10-episode season. This is that first blast of Aeon Flux for liquid television.
Mm-hmm. So he talks about the idea of comic books and whether Aeon Flux is the kind of thing that will continue on in comic books. And he says, absolutely not. And he says, I did a 2-page comic book once. Animation is far more satisfying to me. And he says that he thinks the reason why is that Aeon Flux is designed to be cinematic and that it wouldn't translate into comics.
It's very kinetic.
Yeah. And he says, look, I'm not writing it off. There's a possibility. And in fact, as we know now, they did do an Aeon Flux graphic novel called The Herodotus File. And we'll talk about that later.
But I don't think it renders that original Aeon Flux idea the way that Chung was trying to do it.
Not at all. And also calling it a graphic novel is a little bit misleading because it's more like there's sequential storytelling in it, but then there's also almost like dossier, encyclopedic kind of background information on Aeon and the world that she's in.
It's like a compendium, a companion novel to the
It's like
the
a
show.
player's handbook in a way. Yeah.
Now, here's where we get to what fits into my madman scenario, right? Chung says that he kind of dreamed Aeon Flux. Not all at once. He didn't dream the story and then render it, but he said that the way that he took the architecture, the general imagery, was from his dream states.
He's even asked by this interviewer, well, if you took the ideas for the show from dreaming and they were hallucinations from your subconscious, did you ever think about taking hallucinogenic drugs? And he says, drugs have very little influence on what I actually end up doing, but they can be inspirational during the development process.
So there's one of these shorts that's the erotic elevator.
Yeah.
And that whole short film, it has these repetitions, right? It's these loops, right down to the you gotta. I was about to say you gotta, like it's a video game, because that's also what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
But our characters had to do the same actions over and over again on various floors. There was this plumb line weight that was slowly lowering, and Aeon shot it at the end of her motions at every floor to keep it from connecting.
Yeah.
It does have a sort of dream logic.
Yeah, and we don't know why she's shooting it either. We're just like, okay, for some reason that's her mission, but we're not sure why until the very end of the episode.
And this is that coherence despite having non sequiturs or magical imagery. You know, I don't even know what to call it. If you had to come up with one word to describe the feeling of Aeon Flux, could you do it?
I think the word you're reaching for is liminal.
Yeah. Yeah, it is almost real and almost unreal.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're using like genre specifications, this thing fluctuates from sci-fi to fantasy and all over the place, right? Like,
and spy fiction.
Yeah. In fact, one of the ways that it was originally pitched was a producer said to Chung, we want you to do something that's kind of a spoof on Spy versus Spy. And this is what he came back with.
Well, that makes sense. You know, people dying constantly. Here's a little bit from Peter Chung that kind of symbolizes how slippy, how much slippage in our understanding of Aeon Flux there is out there. So he says, till now, I've resisted stating outright how I've defined the relationship between Aeon and Trevor, as I prefer to let the viewer decide. Once and for all, though, Aeon is not out to kill Trevor. Where do people get this idea? Now, I think probably because Aeon Flux appears to be a killing machine, and she's always chasing him down. She looks like an assassin.
We get the
Everything
impression
is
that
weird.
they're antagonistic towards each other. Yeah, but she's not. They're I think in his mind, they're like opposite sides of the same coin.
And by the time we get to the longer episodes, it's a very complicated relationship that is kind of like ex-lover, like a divorced couple, but not. There's this. Yeah. It's never hate, but this kind of fed up feeling sometimes. I remember one exchange. Trevor, how many different ways can you betray us? And Trevor says, am I the one betraying you, Aeon? And that's the Zen koan that they keep tossing out in every episode.
Yeah, one thing that I did not realize, even though I've been watching this show for over 20 years, over and over and over again, during one of the commentary tracks, they mentioned that when they had to add dialogue to the show, they were worried that it would take away the ambiguity of what was going on. So they purposely wrote all the dialogue to have double and triple entendre meanings. So
they did a really good job with that.
Yeah.
Like, listening to it with a critical ear, trying to figure out what I was going to say about it, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of depth and ambiguity.
He also goes on to talk about, the idea of making the character visually provocative. He says, I was aware from the beginning that the stories I wanted to tell were going to be unconventional, experimental, and non-literal. They're also based on my personal experiences, on observations and insights. They are not meant to make the viewer feel comfortable, reassured, or familiar. So this is interesting right there, because you started off this episode by saying, this makes me feel comfortable, reassured, and familiar.
Yeah, it
and
does
he's saying,
now.
Originally, the whole
time.
point was to do the opposite. He says, the kind of stories that I tell are the only kind that seem right to me, and they aren't linear because life is not linear. Linearity is reductive. For me, the point of any artistic expression lies in its capacity to shift the viewer's consciousness to a perspective that is outside of our usual patterns. Whether the viewer is willing to have his consciousness shifted will depend on whether he considers that a valuable experience.
Let's say that again.
So this is very much in line with 1990s Charlie.
Yeah, whether the viewer is willing to have his consciousness shifted will depend on whether he considers that a valuable experience. If you are not into being kind of off balance or off kilter as you take in a narrative, Aeon Flux is bullshit. Right? It's just it's like, what the hell are you doing? This makes no sense. She dies and then she doesn't, and it's sexy but it's not. It just makes no sense.
I'll give you a good example. When Pulp Fiction came out, which was around the same time, my old man saw it while he was I think he was in Korea. And he came back, and you know what it was like. Like when Pulp Fiction came out, we all went and saw it over and over and over again in the theater because like we fell in love with it.
It was a life event.
Yeah, and my dad was like, "Yeah, I saw that movie. I don't know. Like I kind of fell asleep because I was like, it doesn't make any sense. It's just going from one place to another. Couldn't keep track of anything. Why does anybody even like it?"
You could literally say, I don't know, he was dead and then he wasn't. It just made no sense.
Mm-hmm. And this is kind of what I think Chung was aiming for, because I think now in 2019, we're a little bit more used to that kind of non-linear shifting, especially in television and film.
There's been a lot of pop culture events that are based on this kind of artistic expression, and people have at least the guidebook to the way that this works.
And that might be because of the influence of Peter Chung or Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. Or David Lynch.
Right. Yeah.
So Chung says, the trick is to do something that will be accepted by a wide audience, but that also has something deeply personal about it. A lot of animation isn't expressing anything personal about the makers. Like, he keeps coming back to this, or we kept finding him saying this. There is something that he is working out in the stories of Aeon Flux.
Yeah.
That's separate from
to his life.
Yeah. That's separate from the story that they're delivering or not delivering or, making a cipher of.
Which may seem like it doesn't make any sense, right? But like when you describe these episodes in like one sentence format, it's like, okay, here's an episode where they discover an alien angel. Here's an episode where Aeon gets cloned and Trevor falls in love with the original Aeon, and then she sacrifices herself, and the clone still remains, and he's in love with the clone, right? And you would go, well, what the fuck does that have to do with Peter Chung's life, right?
Right.
But he feels like he's put his personal stamp into this, and it's helping him.
And here's his answer to that question. Each story was motivated by something very personal that I felt. A lot of them had to do with different aspects of living in a modern society. I never really thought of it as taking place far ahead in the future. I just took elements of modern life that bothered me and tried to express my distaste for them. I just took those internal feelings and expressed them in a very physical, external manner.
We kind of breezed over this, but how much of his latter material have you seen?
Looking at that list, not a lot.
It's kind of fascinating to me that he made this over the period of 4 years, and then those other things he's put very similar work into it. I would say Chronicles of Riddick, Dark Fury, and the Animatrix thing are the ones that are the most like Aeon Flux, like aesthetically. But those
come from someone else's sort of mindset or someone else's desire to tell stories.
Almost all of these are other people's branded stuff, and he's just being hired to come in and kind of do his thing with the property. No one would ever think that the Chronicles of Riddick movies would be capable of producing like as well thought out, philosophical storylines as Aeon Flux.
Here's what I would love. I would love to hear someone say, "Oh, you like Rugrats? Hey, do you know what one of those animators did? You're going to love this."
Right. And so it's kind of fascinating that like 20 some odd years have gone by and this guy still hasn't been able to express his vision, his unique creator vision on his own in this medium, despite how important this work was.
This was 4 years of his life, though. I mean, this might have been satisfying enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's real interesting. The movie Fire Breather that's referenced in there, that's based on a comic, and it's a cool comic, but it's nothing like this. And the film, I actually was at the premiere because it was a Cartoon Network thing, and they did the premiere at the Rialto in Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
And it's a big CGI kids movie in a lot of ways. And he had a hand in it, but it wasn't like Aeon Flux in that like he was able to work out personal stuff through it, Right.
It's interesting to talk about that stuff too, thinking about how it began as Peter Chung imagining stuff from his dreams and allowing himself to be inspired by drug experiences and what bothered him, moving into a series done with producers and a writer's room and other people directing, other people writing, even if he was writing stories.
Yeah, he pretty much has a hand in every episode, but there are a number of other people involved on this show. So let's go through them quickly. Japhet Asher is another writer on this show, but he's also, we're going to talk about him in a moment, he's the Liquid Television guy. He's the executive producer on that, and he was a producer on Aeon Flux.
Yeah, and this is not him being a producer on Aeon Flux shorts because he was doing Liquid Television. This is the separate from Liquid Television episodes of Aeon Flux that he continued on to as a writer and producer.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Actually, let me skip ahead because I do have a little bit of notes here about him. So Asher worked on this show, but he's also written novels, television, films, and documentaries. And he's the guy who created Liquid Television.
And he is England-based, isn't he?
He is. Yeah, he's English.
And this is, I didn't know this. Liquid Television was something that was shown on a BBC channel at the same time that it was on MTV?
It was co-produced between the BBC and Colossal Pictures, but it was made specifically for MTV. I don't know that it was played on the BBC. It might have been.
I found a reference, and I can't track it down, but
Okay.
there was like, this also showed on, it wasn't BBC 1 or 2, but like BBC C or something like that.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah. Well, yeah, they're probably paying for 50% of the production budget, yeah. So another person who is in the writer's room is a person named Peter Gaffney. He's now known for working on The Simpsons, but he also came from Rugrats, so Peter Chung and him probably met working on that. There's this guy who is also in the writer's room that is featured prominently in the DVD behind-the-scenes stuff. His name is Mark Mars, and he is gonzo.
How so?
He's just very frenetic, kind of loose cannon type dude, and does not seem like the kind of person who would be able to work well with others and like actually execute stories this precise. And yet, like, I think he worked on that one that's called Thanatobophobia, and him and Chung talking about it, it's really fascinating. But like, I highly recommend, if anybody gets a hold of the DVDs, watch for Mark Mars on these specials, because he's wild.
Yeah, a lot of times when we go through these lists of who's in the writer's room, who produced stuff, they have a bunch of other credits that we can kind of try and locate them within and say, oh, yeah, this person came from here, they did this. Aeon Flux seems almost like it just happened, and these people gathered, and then they dispersed.
Yeah, Mark Mars is a good example. I mean, like, if you look at his IMDb profile, he's worked on other stuff, but not as a writer. Like, he's been production crew since then, and he's clearly like involved in Hollywood, but he's not, not at the level that he was with this show.
And that's kind of the same with Shari Goodhart's, Howard E. Baker, and Todd French.
So Howard E. Baker is the guy who directed all the non-Peter Chung episodes. Yeah. But these are people who directed and wrote the show alongside Chung.
But we don't have a list of credits to kind of say this is what they were up to.
Nope, but we do have them for Stephen Desjarnais. He is a writer who has worked in American film and television, and he's best known for the movie Miracle Mile and for the sci-fi film Cherry 2000. He also wrote the film Strange Brew, which was something I watched a lot as a kid. Have you ever seen Cherry 2000?
Only the box cover.
Dude, that movie is insane. Store. Yeah, but like, it's just fascinating to see the other credits these people have. And here we go. Let's talk about these other two guys. Michael Ferris and John Brancato were also writers on Aeon Flux. They're a screenwriting duo.
I want you to say this list slowly, Chris. I want you to just go slow, one at a time.
Here's what they've worked on other than Aeon Flux: The Game, Terminator 3, Terminator Salvation, Surrogates, and Catwoman. That's the Halle Berry Catwoman movie.
Just rolling down the hill in that list. Just tumble, 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 tumble.
Have you seen Surrogates? It's not bad. I like Surrogates.
It's fine, Chris, but it's not good. And it's not... Look, The Game is amazing.
Yeah, but that's because of Fincher.
Sure. But it's still amazing.
The other two people that worked in this production crew were Robert Valley, who co-directed an episode, and then Eric Singer was also in the writer's room.
Okay, so we mentioned Japhet Asher. He produced Liquid Television. Let's go over Liquid Television again real quick. It's an animation showcase. That's the standard label for it. It was on MTV between 91 and 95. There are a bunch of animated series or icons that were on Liquid Television. For instance, Beavis and Butthead. Mm-hmm. There was also a lot of other stuff. And you would see things from Liquid Television appear again in Spike and Mike's Festival of Animation. I think it's Twisted Festival. Maybe that was a couple of different names. Comic creators who were adapted onto Liquid Television include Art Spiegelman of Mouse fame, Richard Sala, Peter Baggy, and Charles Burns.
Yeah, which is wild because, like, those are all people I read now. But as a kid, I had no idea any of those cartoons were based on their work,
Do you feel like you were getting sort of trained to like the stuff that's in there?
I mean, I think you can see now when you go back and you watch that, you're like, oh yeah, this clearly is like tangential to the alternative comic scene of the 80s and 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny to think about how Art Spiegelman is probably most famous generally for Mouse.
Uh-huh.
But he has a ton of like practically Mobius style work out there.
Art Spiegelman is incredibly prolific. In fact, I can't remember if we talked about this on the show or not, but did I mention to you that whole incident with him recently in which he was hired to write like a history of Marvel?
No.
And yeah, and he made allusions to the president in there and referred to him as the Orange Skull.
Oh wait, yes, I remember that.
And
yes.
Yeah, so even now, 3 decades later, he's still stirring up shit. He's admirable. I like him.
Okay, now you did mention BBC and Colossal were the production companies that made Liquid Television for MTV. Japheth Asher, producer and writer on Aeon Flux, but also the creator of Liquid Television. Here's, I guess we need to do this just for completion's sake, right? MTV is an American paid cable television channel launched in 1981.
Yeah.
What's funny is I said, oh yeah, MTV happened in the middle of my high school. Obviously it didn't. I wasn't in high school in 81, but it came to me. It became a reality for my life in the middle of high school.
It definitely peaked, I think, for us culturally at that time. I would be curious if somebody's mapped out, like, financially where it peaked, because, I mean, clearly it's still successful, it's still on, but I don't think I've watched it in a long time. Also, it's targeted towards young people, of which we are not anymore.
Deeply diversified audience at this point, and programming. The classic complaint, and it's still a truth, MTV used to play music videos, but its programming has changed significantly. And Liquid Television happened in the era of them really trying to make programming out of the brand of MTV, not just music videos.
This is the beginning, man. This is what led to the Real World. I mean, like the success of this, the State, and then you've got the Real World, and that. I mean, I think nowadays most MTV is associated with reality programming, but somehow this bizarre avant-garde experimental cartoon got us to where things are now. So let's back up for a second and talk about how Aeon Flux has been distributed. So it was first broadcast on MTV. That's in the U.S. There are a lot of other distributors in different foreign markets. Then there was a VHS collection that was released between 1996 and 1998. And then that was collected as a box set.
Can we talk about VHS series for just a moment?
Okay.
So many times these collections of VHS tapes that were a series were released, and it was like, here's some random episodes from a thing that you want to get.
Oh right, yeah, we've talked about this before with the X-Files.
Yeah, that's the prime one, but it was such a weird time in retrospect that here's a few with no semblance of order or point. Go ahead, just put that on your shelf.
Well, because continuity wasn't important. Everything, even with X-Files, the only real continuity was between like the beginning episodes of a season and the end episodes of a season. And in the middle, there was just a bunch of monsters of the week. And it, you kind of started each season with a different status quo.
And the folks who were watching soap operas, especially primetime soap operas, weren't asking for the VHS tapes yet.
Right, yeah. It didn't come out on DVD until 2005. This is a thing I think a lot of people from our generation complain about, is MTV was very slow to release a lot of this stuff on DVD. I remember the same thing happened with The State, where there was just a lot of people like, why isn't this available? My wife was still buying VHS copies of people's ripped State seasons.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the mid-2000s.
Lots of rights holders. And also, this series is locked down on MTV's website.
Yeah, and there's another thing to point out here, too, that it probably explains the DVD situation, which is that a lot of these shows, I think Aeon Flux was one of them, played licensed music over them. And that was because it was MTV. And they could not use that licensed music anymore in the rebroadcasting of this material. So, for instance, on the State, all of the modern day songs from the 90s that were played over the comedy sketches in the State had to be re-recorded as original music by Craig Wedren. And I think they did something similar for this.
Here's a neat little thing. I never even heard of this. The show is available as a universal media disc that can play on PlayStation Portable. That came out last year.
These kids with their PlayStation Portables and their universal media discs.
These kids with their stations that they can walk around with and play with.
Guess what that is, right? I mean, I don't know what it is either, but I assume there's a disc that you put into a handheld device.
But if I had to draw it, what would I draw?
Me either.
What would I don't know.
A cell phone. So Peter Chung goes on to address the DVD thing because, well, they remade a lot of this for the DVD. They went back and cleaned it up. And he says in an interview he wanted to use a space to talk about the director's cut version of all the episodes and how they appear on this box set. He says this: geek culture, you know who you are, on the internet today has a strangely selective understanding of cultural history if they think that George Lucas originated the practice of revising a creative work that he has authored when the time came to launch it.
Now, let's point out, Chung described the response to the updated versions as confusion, controversy, and even animosity.
Yeah, yeah.
And he has a long list when he's explaining why it's okay to do this. He talks about Shakespeare revising plays, Stravinsky reworking Rite of Spring, Harold Pinter, Sam Shepard, and David Mamet changing scenes and structures in their plays, Anthony Burgess adding a whole new chapter to the second edition of Clockwork Orange. That's not right. That's a mistake. That's the U.S. version that came over here had the last chapter excised, and then it was put back in the next printing when people started to recognize that, oh, you left out the actual end of the story.
Well, he points out, he uses all that evidence to make this argument. He says, look, TV shows are produced and delivered under tight deadlines. The director is usually revising them up until the last possible minute to get every element as close as possible to what he intends to communicate. The deadline comes up, and he has to stop fixing. If the schedule was either one day shorter or longer for any Aeon Flux episode, it would have differences from the version that viewers saw on the air. There's nothing sacred or complete about that version. It just represents the product as it stood at the moment when work halted.
Now let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So this is where all of the examples, performed plays, a performed symphony, a book, these are all things that are not being sort of copied and sold as commodified nostalgia, right? Mm-hmm. Or records of something that happened before. So I totally understand Chung's argument, and in fact, I feel some serious sympathy toward it. But I also know that I remember how it looked to me, and I would feel off kilter if I tried to rewatch what I had seen 25 years ago and found that it had been all changed. And I think that's the tension. Like, yeah, it's an artwork that should and can be treated as a malleable property. But also, when people buy DVD sets of cartoons that they watched on TV, they usually want the cartoons they watched on TV.
Yeah. So I guess I would just say, like, you know, I've watched this DVD about 1 billion times, and like I said, I used to have these on VHS, and the differences are small.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just technical stuff, like color being punched up, sound design. It's not like they went back in and redrew or reshot entire scenes or sections. I think there might be one thing that was added for an episode, but it's not, there's nothing like huge in this that's going to completely like change the way that you think about the way that the show is presented.
That's true.
But in the behind the scenes, they do like kind of side by side comparisons of what the different episodes look like.
Yeah. But Chung's argument is not, hey, these are just a few details we changed. His argument is, hey, Shakespeare did it. Don't fuck with me.
Yeah. I don't fault him for it. Like I said, he's also a very particular creator about like what his vision is. And, you know, we talked about this briefly earlier, but like this is really like his thing. This is what he's known for. And it is, I don't know if I'd call it like a magnum opus, but it's really like, I think what he'll be remembered for and what he considers to be the work that's the most personal to him. So I can understand him wanting to change it. On the other hand, you know, you and I have argued about Stephen King going back and rewriting The Stand, for instance. And like in that case, that feels a little bit more arbitrary to me. I don't know why, though.
Yeah.
I can't articulate why.
It's just, I think with this, it's the first time in a long time that I've really had to think about what is the purpose of buying a DVD set of a television show? What is the purpose of getting these easily copyable experiences, you know, in some other storage, right? Because like Shakespeare's plays, just to stick with the very first example, those are being performed from a text, and changing that text so that another performance is different. That performance was already going to be different in at least one way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about, you know, art in the age of mechanical reproduction. I don't know. I feel like someone's talked about that before, Chris.
They have, and they committed suicide. But actually, you know what? It's funny. I say this. There's this little piece of paper that's in the DVD box set that's been sitting here next to me at the keyboard the whole time, and it has the answer to our question. Chung writes, 4 of the full-length episodes on the DVD have had selected dialogue rewritten to bring characterization into better continuity with the series as a whole. So they got the original voice actors to come back in and redo that stuff.
Continuity. Oh dear.
Right, which is interesting in retrospect, yeah. But that seems to be the only like major narrative change. Everything else is technical.
So here we are in the present talking about it. Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about how people responded to Aeon Flux in the past. I'm sure you can listen to Super Context out of order, right? It makes sense.
Yeah, but you don't die at the end of every episode.
I don't know. I feel like I do.
I would say that at least we haven't convinced our corporate overlords that we're kind of creating something that's simply satire when in fact it's actually like subversive literature.
And that's a trick question right there, isn't it? Because we don't have corporate overlords. Super Context is made possible by listeners through our Patreon campaign. And the community created by that campaign has transformed the show.
That's right. Because of our patrons, we are able to do things like pay our hosting fees, cover our expenses for the artifacts that we research, and update our recording setup so that it has better production. We're also looking ahead. We want to expand our support so we can do things like get transcripts made, create an internship, and pay for travel so that we can record in person at specific events, for instance, like an industry conference.
Patreon is a platform that allows you, the listener, to schedule a recurring donation, however much you want to support the Super Context mission every month.
And you don't just give us money and don't get anything in return. Not only do you get the pleasure of listening to Super Context every week, but we also have rewards at different tier levels. So for instance, you get access to outtakes, blooper reels, we have bi-weekly bonus mini episodes, and there is a monthly Super King Context episode that comes out only on the Patreon feed that's all about adaptations of Stephen King works. We also allow our patrons to help us choose topics, ask questions that we answer in minisodes, or propose live ad read spots that would go right here.
Hey, what are we doing for Super King Context this month?
We're doing The Running Man. It is our first Bachman book adaptation. and it's going to be very interesting. We're actually recording it tomorrow as we're recording this episode now, so I have a little bit of a preview on it. I've read the research. I've looked up on this movie. It is incredibly strange how this thing got made and how prescient it was about what 2017 actually turned to be.
Oh, shit. Okay, well, something we give to all our patrons, unless they ask us not to, is a thank you in every episode. And this is where that happens. So thank you to our patrons, Alex Laird, Ambrose Allen, Amit Doshi, Bennett Callahan, Beth Barnett, Billy Whitehouse, Brian Chovanik, Caroline Zoids, Chris Marlton, Cliff Landis, Coco, and Dave Jordan.
Thank you also to Dave Wachter, Eilish Phillips, Evan Mapstone, Fred Rasco, Ira James Udaskin, Jason Puckett, Jess Staten, Jill Kaufman, Joseph Aleo, Junta/Cult, Calvin Ellis, and Carmela Padovich.
Thank you to Kate Sharon, Kevin Wetter, Christian Hirvela, Lee Fowler, Liliana Gill, Lokesh Dakar, Luigi Oswego, Melinda Hale, Miriam Meany, and Misha Moon.
Thank you to Nathan Weatherford, Neil G. McGuire, Nick Sage, Patrick Malka, Pete Bowe, Phil, R.M. Rhodes, Rainadin, Matt and Rachel, the podcast, Rob Sloan, Robert Negoesco, Roman Marichek, Ron Bilodeau, Ross Llewellyn, Ryan O'Neill, Sari Nichols, Simon Workman, Thomas Tremberger, and Whitney Buchanan.
And thank you to you, Chris, for helping me save my voice, which is slowly dying in a sickness.
If you want to help save Charlie's voice, visit us again at patreon.com/supercontext. And we're back. So I found an article from 1995 in Newsweek magazine reviewing Aeon Flux. This is especially interesting. I don't know about you, but at the time, like, Newsweek was the thing that people's parents had on their coffee table. You know, like, anywhere I would go and have to wait around for a while.
Yeah,
there was a copy
doctor's
of Newsweek.
offices, administrative offices, yeah.
Yeah, it was like the magazine of note, especially when it came to pop culture and current news. And
are you
so
setting up the lens in which this was?
Yeah, because
Flux?
This isn't. It's not like Polygon is reviewing Aeon Flux here. This is like a pretty mainstream. The way I remember it described to me as a kid was that Newsweek was what Democrats bought and Time was what Republicans bought.
Yeah, I can almost back that up. Yeah, but this is Squaresville talking about Aeon Flux.
Totally. Yeah. So they say Miss Flux wasn't born bad. She's just drawn that way. So immediately referencing Roger Rabbit. They point out immediately she's minimally clad in black leather. It's a dominatrix warrior's harsh beauty that nicely complements the cruel wasteland she calls home. This was created by Korean-American Peter Chung. Most of the animation is done in Japan. It's typical of the adult-oriented anime that's grabbed American fans. Post-apocalyptic, violent, and intensely sexual. I'll point out, I'm pretty sure the headline of this article references Akira, and it seems like the only anime these people have ever seen is Akira.
Well, that's about right for the time, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, that is fair. Here's the other quote. This is from a recent Wired magazine reviewing this show in 1995. Japan's animated futuristic fantasies carry on a mad love affair with the threats and possibilities of technology. Anime may be finally taking off here in the United States because America is finally catching up to Japan's post-industrial society. We've consumed their cars and camcorders for years. We love their hardware. Now we're ready for the pop cultural software that goes with it. What they're sending us is a weird hybrid of Blade Runner, H.P. Lovecraft, and Godzilla, only with characters that look like extras from the Archies. I believe they mean Archie comics there when they say the Archies.
This article kind of lost its plot pretty quickly, didn't it? Aeon Flux was just being understood in terms of, here's this vanguard of Japanese animation from a Korean-American animator who is working for an American company.
Because it's adults looking back at this thing and going, what is this? Oh, really? Oh, I see. The Japanese. Yes, I love their microwaves. It's like very, like, this whole thing in here about cars, camcorders, and hardware is so weird. But it's also, you remember, we've talked about this before, that, like, in the 90s, there was this general kind of, like, I don't know if I'd call it racist, but, like, cultural idea of Japan in the United States that was like, oh, they're working on everything so much harder than we are.
It was a little
so much
racist,
smarter.
Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And then it was subsequently reapplied to our generation, and they were like, you guys really need to pull it together so that we can catch up to Japan.
I really want to make fun of that idea a little bit, but since that would involve me saying phrases that are just sort of tiresome at this point, I'm just going to move on from that by saying, so it seems like at the time, Aeon Flux for the general mainstream culture was just another piece in that whole thing that was happening. I do like this phrase.
Bemused by cartoons for people who weren't children.
Hybrid of Blade Runner, Lovecraft, and Godzilla. That's an interesting, that you could do something with that triangle right there. That does seem like something that we could work on, but it also seems
money that this article is in reference to what's it called, Erotica Doji, the Legend of the Overfiend.
Oh,
and
Jesus!
They just didn't want to talk about that, so they talked about Aeon Flux instead.
Got it.
And so, for us to transition awkwardly from one piece of pop culture to another, Charlie, this is where we probably should mention that Aeon Flux was adapted into a live-action film in 2005. That film was directed by Karen Kusama, and it starred Charlize Theron as Aeon. Can you believe that was 14 years ago?
No, it seems very close.
Yeah.
And also, do you remember what you thought when that happened?
Well, I think this was a moment of fanboyishness on my part, because I immediately was like, there's no way they're going to get it right. And then I went the day it came out, and I watched it. And I will just say, like, my general subjective take on that film was, it's fine, but it's not Aeon Flux. It's one of many things that have been adapted into film that are based on another property because they think they'll find some success with the original fandom, but is really kind of something else. Like, I think a good example of this is the Constantine movie that came out around the same time in the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have anything to do with Hellblazer, but it's an okay movie.
I remember enjoying it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of the same thing. It's sort of like a live-action greatest hits of the things that you saw in the TV show, but it's not really Aeon Flux.
Yeah. I had a weird thought this morning about Stripes. It just kind of came to me. I was thinking about if someone said, let's remake Stripes.
You mean the Bill Murray movie?
Yeah,
Stripes?
The comedy with Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, where two schmoes join the army just because they kind of get on each other's case about it. And then have a slightly ridiculous sex comedy escapade in the army.
Not with each other.
Not with each other. If you said, let's remake Stripes, there would be a real sort of, you can't remake Stripes. You can't, get that lightning back in a bottle.
Yeah.
But you could totally do the story. And now it would be a very interesting story. Two guys who aren't really doing anything with their lives convince each other we should join the army. I actually would watch that now to find out what it's like.
But it also really depends on the production team that's involved.
Exactly.
Right? And how they approach it.
It wouldn't be Stripes. And it wouldn't be like, oh, yeah, show me Stripes. Give me that Bill Murray magic again. It's more like that story works. And let's see what happens with it now.
Another good example of this is everybody's talking about how they're going to remake Big Trouble in Little China with The Rock in the Kurt Russell role, right?
That's going to be
so
your
reaction. That's your reaction. And I think it's not going to be the same movie at all, right? There's no way that you could make Big Trouble in Little China today in a way that would be culturally acceptable. And the minute you put The Rock in there, it's a totally different thing as well, right? It's just they're using – we've talked about this so many times before. They're using properties that they own in portfolios that have attached fandoms to them that they can then say, okay, well, it's easier to remake this thing than it is to buy a new thing.
Yeah. And the thing that I'm circling with this, and actually putting Stripes against Big Trouble in Little China really illustrates this. To try and make a mass market version of Aeon Flux, which was such a individual vision, meant to embody one person's deal with modern life, is to kind of take the surface and say, oh, this must be the interesting part, and trying to recreate it.
Exactly. I mean, it's very obvious. This is not an episode about the film version of Aeon Flux, but it's pretty obvious that somebody in a production studio was like, wow, that Matrix movie is making a lot of money.
Right.
What do we have that's kind of like that? You remember that cartoon in 1991? That's in our portfolio. Sure, let's greenlight that. Get it going, I think that's pretty much how the ball got rolling. Unfortunately, you and I really don't know what we're talking about here in terms of how that movie was made, but Peter Chung does. And I have comments from him about the movie before the movie came out, when the movie came out, and after the movie came out.
This is kind of beautiful. Okay. Let me do the pre-film Peter Chung.
Okay.
In a film, I'm not interested in getting into the author's head. I hate films that are about characters sitting around talking. I want to see it translated into events where what's going on inside these characters is the action. It's physicalizing the internal. I'm as curious as anyone to see it, the movie version. I'm not saying I'm down on it. I hope people will like it, and it might give the animated version a new life.
Okay, so that's before the world saw this movie. Then when the movie came out, Peter Chung was interviewed, and the magazine article describes Chung like this: like a parent who unfailingly supports an errant child in the face of incontrovertible evidence of their guilt. He's trying to find something good to say about the film adaptation of the cult animation series he lovingly created a decade ago, and he said this: the film does have its fans. It appeals to a certain kind of viewer. It is different from a lot of similar products that come out of Hollywood. It is a little more interesting.
It's like someone said, here's 4 things you could say if they want to comment. And he just read them all instead of only one.
However, let's remember, because the film was made, he was able to go back and clean up the DVD, have that release come out, get some re-acknowledgement for that. And apparently he was getting recognition again for the animated series around the same time. The show became a subject of a retrospective that was at the Melbourne International Animation Festival, and it screened at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image with episodes chosen by Chung there. That's pretty cool.
So it did do what he would have hoped it would do.
It was like reappraised critically.
But then once he'd gotten past it enough to be honest, here's what he had to say. The movie is a travesty. I was unhappy when I read the script 4 years ago. Seeing it projected larger than life in a crowded theater made me feel helpless, humiliated, and sad. Well.
Wow.
That's a real 3-act play right there.
There's even more. He says, maybe the makers didn't understand the source material. They thought they were being true to it, or they thought they understood it, but they didn't think it would appeal to a wide enough audience, so they altered it to suit their presumed target. They claim to love the original version, yet they do not extend that faith to their audience.
And then he kind of finds a way to restate his own artistic intent. Presuming to know what an audience wants to see and tailoring the product to fit it is a method that sucks all the drive I'd have to ever create anything. So he's saying they took this property and they said, oh, we love it, but we don't know if the audience will, so let's change it to what they will love.
Yeah.
And then Chung says, it's self-defeating disingenuous. That's an interesting phrase. I'm not naive about the realities of making unconventional films in the arena of mass entertainment. It's possible to make good unconventional films. It's also very hard. In any case, if you're going to risk failure, I say do it boldly, with conviction. The problem with the movie is its failure of nerve.
Oh.
That is the most true statement I can imagine. Like, if the film version of Aeon Flux tried to be a film version of the cartoon Aeon Flux,
Yeah.
people would have lost their minds. It would have been amazing in at least one way.
Yeah. Exactly. What they tried to do was have the Matrix with a little bit of what made the TV show work, and then they kind of turned it into a romance at the end.
Yeah.
But there were like nods to the show, right? Like things like Aeon and her, I can't remember the name of her companion, but like running through that gauntlet of traps to try to get between Bregna and Monica. So you would think after all of that, Charlie, that like they'd be done. MTV would have wiped their hands clean and they'd say, okay, we're done with Aeon Flux now, right?
No, there's more money to be made, Chris. Don't be foolish.
Right. So they just announced that they are working on a second attempt at a live action version. This time it will be a TV show.
Okay. I probably will miss that one too.
And like I said, there's a graphic novel version of this as well. There have also been video games. We don't have numbers for how successful the TV show was, but I would say just based on our anecdotal childhood, that this is something that appeared in front of millions of people who, one way or another, whether they remember it fondly or weirdly, when you say the words Aeon Flux, are like, oh, right, that thing.
Yeah. Let's talk about something that you brought up earlier, the idea that it's not sexual, in the sense that it's not sort of a horny, turn you on kind of sexy.
I think it's sexual. It's not sexy. Yeah.
It's a very particular kind of animation and a very particular rendering of the body, especially the female body, but all bodies, and sort of the mechanics of human biology.
Yeah, just on like an anatomical level, like the way that I don't know what the word is for this, the models that they use for how human bodies work in this show is wrong. It's the kind of thing that, like, if you were in a drawing class, they'd be like, no, like the legs are only supposed to be 4 heads high, and you've got them 5 heads high,
and
right?
People don't bend like that.
Yeah, everybody's appendages are too long, their faces are too elongated, they're emaciated. Emily Uis says this: aesthetically, Chung draws a stark view of anti-heroes. Aeon Flux's characters are cadaverous and angular, as opposed to the svelte muscularity of popular vigilantes like Superman and Wonder Woman. The characters are all drawn with razor-sharp skeletal features and gravity-defying hairstyles. The acrobatic anatomy of Aeon, who always sports a dominatrix-inspired outfit, is presented with clear sexuality.
And I think that is talking about how Aeon Flux, the lead character, is clearly aware of her body and its effect on people. But like, there's one of those shorts
it's
where
like a tool in her toolbox.
In one of those shorts, she's supposed to sort of trying to seduce someone who's about to shoot her, to give one of her compatriots time to come up and kill the guy. And it is awful. The sort of the tongue and teeth and the sort of kind of thing.
And it doesn't work.
And then
the
they
guy
both
just
get
shoots her
shot in the head.
Yeah. There's another episode where like at the end of the episode, she's revealed to have this like key that's supposed to be like an important, symbol, an artifact that proves her guilt of something.
Yeah.
And she reveals, oh, it's just a key to my chastity belt. And she unlocks it, and everybody goes, oh. And then everybody in the room pulls the same key out, implying that everybody's got a key to Aeon's chastity belt except for Trevor.
Which is its own kind of... Well, let's go back to Emily Uis, and she has a very different conclusion than I have.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about this too much, but when she says, in a more psychological sense, Aeon Flux provides a progressive view of sex positivity and gender identity, I am caught always by the kind of faux pornographic imagery of Aeon Flux, in that there's a lot of stuff that's presented that if it were drawn like Superman or Wonder Woman, if it were drawn with sort of an eye towards making it real, it would be really dirty and exploitative. But then she continues and says, the character of Aeon displays unapologetic promiscuity and kink throughout. And that then suddenly puts some things into place for me. The show is very all-encompassing in terms of sexuality, in terms of pairing. It's pansexual in the world it creates, and it doesn't differentiate between like straight love-based sexuality and everything else, including weird ass like eggs in faux animals and pumps, and I like all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah. Well, they point out too that, like, for instance, there's an episode where there's an alien that doesn't have a biological gender the way we understand it, right? And so I think that was Peter Chung's way of trying to tackle that representation in a way that could be shown on MTV in 1992. There's another episode in which a male citizen gets pregnant. I remember one of the episodes, there's a woman who gets like shot in the back when she tries to cross the border, and so a piece of her spine gets removed. And the way that Trevor makes her orgasm is not by having sex with her, but by performing surgery on her spine.
That's some serious kink right there.
Right. And so these are all things that like clearly were sexual but not necessarily sexy.
Yeah.
Were kind of weird and gross in the way that they were shown. You know, you mentioned the eggs, right? There's this like weird like fetishization of these odd eggs.
Alien eggs, yeah.
Yeah. And I think so I wonder, like, if this show were made today, how much more it would try to tackle issues of sexuality and gender than it did even then. But even then, this was like pushing boundaries, I would say.
Now, my bet is that if you tried to make it today in the same kind of arena, like on MTV, on a paid cable channel that's not a on-demand channel, that it would actually have this odd reversal of the original regulation. Because there's notes about Chung had to take out some of this sort of obvious sexiness, like two women naked in a bathtub massaging each other turned into a woman scrubbing the back of another woman who was in the bathtub. A sexually explicit scene was turned into sort of a makeout scene instead of a really like hardcore encounter. I bet you those would be more okay now, and that the kind of transgressive stuff would be what people would say, oh, I don't know if we're ready for that. I don't know if we want to signal that we're interested in trans rights, or if we want to say that we are interested in looking at gender. We need to get to everybody, so let's pull back from, you know what I mean?
I do, yeah. And I think, so one of the things that's interesting about the show is that, like, it's clear, among other things, that Chung was thinking about, like, what limits he could push up against with this kind of story, and explored those throughout the series. But at the same time, like, I rewatch it now and I go, wow, this is a lot of white people in this cartoon, you know?
Yeah.
And so while it's like, it's really interesting in how it's exploring sexuality and possibly gender, for instance, it doesn't really address ethnic differences, other than that, like, the Monicans are slightly different than the Bregnans, I think.
Yeah.
Like Aeon has like slightly darker skin, but not much.
Well, so just to extrapolate from stuff Chung has said, that wasn't something he had trouble with.
Yeah. And let's keep in mind, he's a person of color.
And here's his final say, I think, on the subject of regulation. MTV had objection to overt sexuality in Aeon Flux, but no complaints about the extreme level of violence. What does that say to Chung? Quote, "This is America," is what that says.
He talks a lot in the commentary about how after they did the shorts, he didn't want there to be a lot of overt violence on it anymore. He said, the overt violence that you see in the shorts is one of the easiest things to animate. and that he found it really boring.
Huh.
And that when they went to full episode orders, he was like, yeah, like she has guns and stuff, but I don't really want her to be shooting people all that much.
And that fits the arc of the show, going from that original pilot, which was this sort of spectacle, to the final episodes, which are pure surrealist science fiction.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings us to trying to figure out the themes of this show, and also to returning to that thing that you said at the beginning. I don't know if I'm going to be able to remember your thesis statement, but it was something along the lines of the modernism seen through a postmodern lens.
No, a modernist impulse in a postmodern time.
Okay. So let's keep that in mind as we talk about, sort of the bigger picture stuff with Aeon Flux.
Let me give another step to what I was saying there. Chung is actively trying to critique himself and the world he lives in through art that is constrained only by his intended constraints, not by outside forces.
Yeah.
At a time when, mid-90s, pastiche and the kind of recurrent nostalgia was selling.
Yeah.
And so despite everyone trying to review this into a corner of, it's Japanese animation, it's like these things, it was escaping that kind of commodified nostalgia by being very particular to a creator's vision, even though it seemed to rub up against those things that were being remade.
So do you think then that Aeon Flux resists commodified nostalgia, and that's why the film version didn't work? Because let's remember, like you were saying, like this show makes me nostalgic for a better time in my life.
Yeah, it makes me nostalgic for a time when I was consuming it, not the time that's represented in it.
Yeah.
My guess is that that Chung had it right, trying to make the thing based on a very particular artwork that would then appeal to everybody, just kind of made it dead.
So then I want to take a closer look at this whole Gnosticism thing, because I'm not honestly all that familiar with it. And so when they started throwing around like this is clearly symbolic of Gnosticism, I was like, I know a little bit about that. I gave my dad the Gnostic Bible one year for a holiday.
You're such a strange child.
He's very religious, so I was like, hey, you should check out these. But this is what Gnosticism is, if you're unfamiliar with it. This is the dictionary definition, so we're just going to the most basic, bare bones version here. Gnosticism was a prominent heretical movement in the 2nd century Christian church, and it was partly of pre-Christian origin. The idea of its doctrine taught that the world was actually created and ruled by a lesser divinity known as the demiurge, and that Jesus Christ was an emissary of a remote supreme divine being. And so esoteric knowledge, gnosis, of this supreme divine being is what will enable the redemption of the human spirit. So essentially, my understanding of it is that the demiurge was pretending to be the all-powerful God and created us and the earth, but created it in a way that was fundamentally morally wrong. And Jesus is seen as being sent by the real God to us to be like, no, I didn't authorize this, but you can be redeemed by learning more about me.
I feel so not lost, but so unqualified to engage these ideas.
There's a lot here, and I have to admit that I don't know a lot about it either. The most I know about it comes from reading Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, so it makes sense that you referenced that earlier.
Well, let's make the connections very quickly. And these are brought to us by somebody else, okay? So we're just telling you, the listener, what other people have said about Gnosticism and why Aeon Flux might be seen as revealing something about Gnosticism. Aeons, emanations of God, are male-female pairs. And so Aeon Flux and Trevor Goodchild in the show can be understood as inseparable parts, a yin-yang kind of whole that are embodying a kind of constant struggle that is life, chaos and order, the idea of science and nature, the mind and the body, whatever, and that the kind of interaction that they have with each other, the sort of quote complex dance of power and love, unquote, is reminiscent of the way that Gnosticism understands our life force.
Yeah. This is some Gnostic heavy-duty stuff here that says that an aeon is a male-female pair that's called a syzygy. My understanding of syzygy, Charlie, comes from an X-Files episode. Syzygy is the term that's used for when planets are in alignment with one another.
That sounds familiar.
In the solar system. But anyways, this male-female pair of power and love closely parallels the way that Good Child and Aeon Flux are depicted in this show.
Now, we don't have Peter Chung dropping in to say, the way that I understood Gnosticism also influenced.
Yeah.
But
this is the stuff that he's like, I'm going to leave it up to you.
Well, my bet is that he read about that.
Yeah.
Just for fun. You know, if he were trying to present this religion, I think we'd hear more about it. But I think this is just something that it's like the way that Norse mythology will influence me. I don't know it very well. I'm not Nordic. I'm not like trying to understand. I'm not Neil Gaiman, but my understanding of Ragnarok and inevitability and Odin and Thor's relationship will in some way influence stories that I try to come up with.
Well, they're archetypes.
Yeah.
And that they're like human cultural archetypes that, like, you know, somebody like Alan Moore would argue come from an idea space that's outside of us, that like regardless of what our actual on-earth culture is, it makes sense because it's just something that we all intuitively understand.
And it's a sign of one of the qualities of Aeon Flux, the show, that it's able to render that in a way that people can pinpoint if they know about Gnosticism.
Yeah.
Without ever making someone who doesn't know anything about it think about it.
Yeah, yeah. And so the last thing that I want to examine here a little bit is Aeon Flux, this idea that the show is about freedom.
Well, it's an anti-show about freedom,
yeah.
Or it's an attempt to
Chung
not make a
has
show
said,
about freedom.
Right. Well, Chung has said she's already free, so she's not fighting for freedom.
Right, because the terrorist or the person who's doing this kind of thing, infiltrating and killing,
yeah,
we give them moral weight by saying, oh, they're fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
The horrible things they do here are made acceptable by their goal. And Chung said, I wanted to take that away so that she wouldn't be a revolutionary. It wouldn't be trying to bring down a 1984 government.
And so he describes this, and he says, Aeon actually doesn't want the Marin people to be as free as she is. She doesn't even want that. She's not fighting for their freedom. He says revolutionaries need an oppressive establishment to thrive, just as governments need hidden enemies to justify their structure. And he said, I never understood allowing one's nationality or allegiance to a regime to be a defining characteristic of one's personal identity. That is purely an accident of birth. Who I am, even with that historical framework, is a matter of my own invention. And so in that sense, I apparently side with Aeon. Let's remember, this guy grew up in Korea.
Yeah, Peter Chung is a transnationalist. That's awesome.
And he's referencing South Korea and North Korea through Breen and Monica. And that's something I would have never picked up on in the 90s when I was a kid, but I still understood it.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And to have it sort of retroactively explained doesn't take away from it. It's like, oh, yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Now, this leads us to sort of what the artistic project of Aeon Flux was, or one of the main projects within it for Chung, was to explore ambiguity. moral ambiguity, ambiguous existence, right? Ambiguous spirituality. And I found this article, this sort of editorial from a magazine called Film Comment that was written in 1996 by Michael Atkinson. And Atkinson wrote a really like high-flying 700 words about Aeon Flux.
Okay.
MTV's Aeon Flux is the purest distillation of the new teleconsciousness, an utterly arcane, visually relentless, narratively hermetic vision of a superhero future world after the rain. There's a lot of little bits of poetry that he just tosses in there. Anyone who has happened upon it while channel dancing knows the suck of its vertiginous perspectives, the haunting lure of its ambiguous nexuses.
Oh, whoa. This guy's definitely going for that.
Yeah. Whatever the truth, right? Or whatever the quality of this writing.
Yeah.
This is what it aroused in a critic writing for Film Comment. You know, at its core, this idea that you can't be sure. What happens if you have to let go of being certain? What happens if you have to try and navigate ambiguous moral situations that have already been rendered for you with clear morality through superficial qualities? What happens when those superficial qualities are pulled away?
So I'm going to try to do something here, and it may not work.
Okay.
But let's try to tie back to how we started this episode, which was that this show is a symbol for you, and I think for me to a lesser extent, of a time that we're nostalgic for because things were simpler for us at that point in time. And, well, I think that the reason for that is because right now everything's ambiguous in the real world. And we don't like that sense of uncertainty. But oddly enough, we're looking back at this cultural product that was all about ambiguity and kind of yearning for it, when it's depicting a world that's more like what we live in now.
Yeah. Well, there was room to consider ambiguous morality before we were attacked. I'm just going to say that. I don't think that way all the time, but a way to try to understand this is that when America and pop culture and political culture was very much about two people who looked the same arguing that we should spend more or less money on something, it's a lot easier on the nerves, right, than the arguments we're having right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if our parents' generation would agree, if they would say, like, well, actually, like, at that period of time, like, my anxiety was just as ratcheted up as yours is now. But I agree with you. I mean, anecdotally, it seems a lot worse right now.
I've checked in with my parents and some of the professors that I work with who are older than me.
Yeah.
And kind of said, hey, what were the 90s like? What was Watergate like? How did it feel? You know, like checking in on the, you know, the two impeachments beforehand.
Yeah.
And my friend Hugh, he said, oh, we just didn't give a shit about the stuff, you know, with Nixon. It was like, whatever, you know, they're working it out. I said, what about the oil crisis? He's like, yeah, you just got your gas every other day. It just wasn't a big deal.
Huh.
It was not inflicted upon them the way it's inflicted upon us now. And the Clinton stuff, it was sort of a, what are you people doing kind of feeling. It wasn't a, oh my God, the world's collapsing kind of feeling.
So do you think then that there are kids who are in high school and college now that are watching what's going on? We should establish, as we're recording this episode, the impeachment hearings are going on for President Trump based on potential interference with Ukraine.
Yeah, we're avoiding them as we speak.
Well, yeah, I did. I actually watched a little bit of it before
we
popped on and recorded. But do you think that there are high school and college students who are like, yeah, I know that exists, but I don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with me. This is a much simpler time in my life.
I have heard reference to a certain amount of the population who just doesn't want to dig into this stuff, wants to find out when it's over. You know, there are polls that consistently talk about what did you think before you found out about the impeachment? What do you think now that you've paid attention? What if you learned this piece of information? And people's minds are changed like in the flow of those polls.
Yeah, I've seen that too. The polls are going up, and it went from something like 35% to like 70% are now like, okay, yeah, he clearly did something wrong.
And it's crazy, the idea that there's new information right now, except some people don't have the headspace or have the sense of self-care not to be dragged into the minutia every day of what's going on in those hearings. And if I can try and get it back to Aeon Flux.
Yeah.
I had the space in 1991 or 2 to see Aeon Flux, be confused by it, wonder what the fuck was going on, and think about it when I wasn't watching it and kind of hoping I'd run into it again and then chewing on it some more. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, as I said at the top, if someone did this to me with, you know, something I was interested in seeing what the story was, I would feel like, why are you making this hard? Isn't it hard enough already? Why do I have to search out the pieces of this story that you're trying to tell me?
I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, because there's things that we've talked about in the last year that are absolutely as hard as this, if not harder, that you've fully embraced. Like, yes, you're a huge David Lynch adherent, but like you watched all of Twin Peaks season 3. But I would also go out and say, like, you love Too Old to Die Young, which is something that has really just glanced past most people because they were like, nope, I don't have the energy for this.
I am so glad that you brought up those 2 points. So now I understand why you're feeling like I'm not telling the truth. I don't find the narrative experience difficult in such a way that I would reject it. Yeah. I'm saying that if Twin Peaks The Return, you just had to turn on the television and hope that the episode was playing, or
I see what you mean.
Try
it's
and
the
catch,
way that it's distributed. Yeah.
Is this episode 10? Is this what is?
Right,
then I would be like, you got to go wait. Whereas Too Old to Die Young, which is a excruciating and wonderful viewing experience, I had total control.
Yeah,
I go downstairs and like, I'm watching episode 2 tonight.
If you like tuned in to Fox in the 90s and Too Old to Die Young was on TV, you would have been like, nope, I'm done. Yeah. I'm out.
It's like, I don't think I can wait around to find out what's happening here. Although, you know, if I saw Elliot from Die Hard talking about, you know, the crucifixion and pretending to be Jesus, I might have stuck around a little bit longer.
I have no idea what you're talking about because I haven't gotten to that point in that show. But I think that what we're talking about here, though, are 3 stories in which the creators thought about the distribution method that they would reach their audience with first. And it seems like a simple thing that you would assume all storytellers would think about, but they really don't seem to. And in this case, Peter Chung was thinking, all right, I know this is a thing people are going to watch over and over and over again. And the way I want to hook them is by doing these 3 things. And I think it's a very different thing to say, well, anybody can choose whatever they want to watch at any time on any device. And so this is how we're going to frame stories. You've been listening to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How it's made and how it informs our everyday culture.
Our theme music is Human Factor by Mile Marker.
And right now you're listening to Drive Fast by 3 Chain Links.
Show notes and all our past episodes are available at supercontextpodcast.libsyn.com.
You can email the show at supercontextpodcast@gmail.com to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and to suggest topics for future shows.
And I'm available on Twitter as @ChristianSager.
And I'm there @Bennett Radio. 2 N's, 2 T's.